Hello, hello. I've just been watching, this amazing short documentary on this case in the UK of an old lady who was murdered back in 1967, called Louisa Dunn. The case was never solved. Basically, she was raped and murdered in her own home, and she was born in Victorian times. This lady went way back, and obviously now there's virtually nobody left alive, just her granddaughter. She's the only surviving granddaughter, and she looked about, I didn't look it up, but she looked about 75 maybe. She was definitely getting on. And there's one policeman still alive who was involved, and one doctor. And basically they caught the guy last year, the end of 2024, and they've just convicted him of the murder, amazingly. And it's a record, apparently, the longest ever period there's ever been in the UK, I don't know about the world, between a murder actually happening and it getting solved and somebody getting convicted. It's the record. Obviously it's 58 years, it's amazing. And they convicted the guy based on DNA. He'd happened to have been arrested something, I think, 12 years earlier, and he had to give DNA, but he cleverly at the time didn't give fingerprints. He made an excuse because he's an old man now, obviously. He's 92 years old, and he gave the excuse at the time something like he's got arthritis in his fingers, so it'd be really hard to do, because he knew that back in 1967 the police had a palm print that they got from I think her door frame or something of her house. And obviously they had fingerprinting back then, but it was like really basic. You know, they used to go around with ink pads and take people's fingerprints, and they did it a lot. It happened in Bristol, the murder, which is in the Midlands in the UK, so halfway up the island, our little island. And yeah, it's bloody amazing. At the time it was big news, and they took loads of fingerprints of local men, and they missed the actual murderer apparently by a couple of miles. He was just outside the scope of the area they were scoping out, for the fingerprinting. And but they kept the evidence, like her clothes that had DNA on it. Obviously it wasn't around back then, but nowadays with modern techniques, I don't know what made them reopen the case this many years later, but they did. And the granddaughter didn't even know. The first thing she knew that they caught a guy was when they caught him. Like, she didn't know the case had been reopened and the police were looking into it again. But they had her clothes from the murder back from 1967, and they swabbed, I think it was her skirt she was wearing, and they got DNA, and they looked on their database, and they happened to have, obviously, the murderer's DNA from 12 years previously, where he'd been arrested for something else and given it. So that's how they caught him. And it turns out that he'd done things before, as you'd kind of expect. You think, oh, he's raped and murdered a lady in her home. It's probably not the first time he's ever done something like this. It doesn't feel like that way. And he had. He'd been caught before, to about 10 years later in the late 70s, for raping two old ladies, like both in their 70s and 80s, which is amazing. Like, you think the guy is obviously a complete loon. Like, if you're going to rape a lady, why would you rape a very elderly lady? And apparently he was examined like you'd expect by a psychiatrist at the time. But obviously this is psychiatry in the 70s, it was different back then. And they didn't recognise kind of what he was, kind of. And because apparently he originally got a life sentence for the two rapes, because he didn't kill these ladies, he just raped them. And both in their homes, and he originally got a life sentence, and then it was, because he was the previous good character, it was reduced to 7 years. So he did 7 years and then got released. And because obviously different police forces didn't link their evidence back then, there was no computerized systems or anything. They never linked him to the 1967 rape and murder of that lady. And it's only happened, just now, like last year, and he's just been convicted. So it's amazing, really. They said they had one doctor still alive from the original case. There was one policeman, they showed the documentary that they were talking to, back from the original case, and he's 85 now, and the murderer himself is 92. So they were lucky he was still alive, to even, account for his crimes. But you kind of think he technically has got away with it, he's only had to account for his crimes at 92, and by that age, how long has he got to live? And he was actually a married man with 3 children as well. His wife had died, I think they said 10 years earlier. So, you know, after doing all those horrific, heinous crimes, you know, he went on to live quite a normal life. You know, he got married, he had children. You know, you think, fuck me, you know, that's crazy. You know, and yeah, that he got away with it all that time, and then yeah, it's amazing, really. I was stunned, like, when I was, like, you know, watching the documentary. I was like, fucking hell, this is so unusual, like, in every way, you know. And her grandchild never actually knew her, but she said it doesn't stop her feeling stuff. And she says obviously she was very aware of the murder her whole life, and when she was a child, like, her mum tried to guard her from it, because obviously it was her mum's mother that got murdered, and, you know, she always protected her from it. You know, she didn't want to burden her with it, so she always used to tell her dad, like, never to mention the murder. You know, she saw all that, and, you know, but she's still, like, burdened with it in her head, you know, even though she never actually knew her grandmother that got murdered. But obviously it's still the family history, and it's still affected her whole life, and it's affecting her big time now. The guy's been arrested and convicted. She said she's probably going to need a bit of time to process it, you know. It's really affecting her now, even more so, because the guy's been caught. Obviously it's a good thing, but it's, you know, it's now affecting her more than ever, even though she never knew her grandmother. But it's an amazing story. I recommend looking it up, and anyone who's interested. Her name was Louisa Dunn. So the murder happened in 1967 in Bristol in the UK. So yeah, that's that. Bye.